Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Paul's Messy Bench Models. I've got an update on AMT's GMC Astro 95 kit. I've been making slow but steady progress. The Big Rig group build is hosted by Jeff's Model Garage and N.Y.S. Modeling, so you guys should go over and check out their channels too. So, in the last video, I was illustrating the troubles I was having with getting the exhaust system installed without interfering with the fuel tanks, and I managed to get rid of the under-the-frame crossover pipe, and I've scratch built a crossover pipe on top of the frame so that I can make my connection above the fuel tank. And I can find pictures on the internet of GMC Astros that are set up that way, so I don't know if it's exactly right in detail, but at least it's plausible. And the air intake pipes and the exhaust pipes from the kits, they're made up of halves, and you have to sand the seam away and pretty them up. And it was a lot easier to just get rid of them and replace it with styrene tubing. This mesh around the exhaust pipe, that's actually a part from Detail Master. It looked a lot better than the kit part. I've been adding some wiring and plumbing to the brake lines, air tanks, engine, just to busy things up a little bit. When building the front suspension, the illustration on the instructions, it seems to show the tie rod upside down, and if you put it on that way, it'll rub against the springs. So you need to flip it over, and then it will fit. Another fit issue I've found is with the brake parts. If you just stick them on, you'll find that when you get your tires on, the tires will rub against the brakes. So you have to put a spacer in between the wheel back and the brake parts. And also, you got to move them down a little bit so they won't bump the frame. As I was installing the engine, I found that the starter motor and the frame, they really want to interfere with each other. So I wound up notching the frame. It's narrow up here and it widens back here, so I just increased the length of the narrow area of the frame. And then the engine would fit in. As you're installing the engine, you can kind of see that the fan is tucked up inside the fan shroud around the radiator. So I had to install the engine and the radiator at the same time, kind of wiggle them down in there. Otherwise, the radiator will be difficult to get around the fan. The kit radiator hoses, I had trouble lining them up with the holes. They were just the wrong length. So I wound up replacing them with insulation. I stripped off some wire. This air intake pipe, I had trouble getting all the angles correct, so I wound up slicing it right here, right behind this connection, so that I could rotate the end piece after this piece was installed to get it to sit flat against the top of the engine. So the air tanks that come with the kit, they all have hollow backs, so it's kind of tricky to get them installed where they look good from any direction. So I wound up replacing the air tanks with styrene tubing. Basically, I would just take a piece of styrene tubing and I'd mix up some 2-part epoxy putty and kind of round over the ends, and after it had hardened, I chucked it in a lathe and just kind of sanded the ends to a dome shape. And that worked pretty well. If you don't have a lathe, you could just chuck it in a drill and sand down the ends that way. Once I got everything on the frame together, I'm kind of suspicious that the fuel tank frames are sitting too low. If I was to ever build this one again, I might cut off the tops of these brackets so that the tops of the straps are even with the frame, and I think that would be a more realistic ground clearance under the truck. Started work on the interior. The dashboard paints up nicely. There's some good detail on there. There are marks on the floor of the cab where you would think that's where the seats would go, but if you use those marks, the driver's seat won't line up behind the steering wheel. So I would recommend ignoring those marks and having your dashboard in place when you stick the seat in so that it'll wind up in the right spot. The steering wheel that came with the kit was very badly mangled and warped, and I tried to straighten it, but I wound up just breaking it. So I stole a steering wheel out of a kit I'd started several years ago. So if you ever see me selling a Diamond Rio kit on eBay, don't buy it because the steering wheel is missing. I cut back the back of the sleeper area so that I could do some reasonable test fitting. Since I've already installed the hinges on the bottom edge of the cab, it was difficult to get the interior in and out for test fitting. So I just cut off the back, and now I can just kind of tilt it in to the cab. Got the cab painted up with splash paints, Roman red. These logos and things and the numbers are just the kit decals. I stole the stripe out of another kit just because I thought it looked cool. I was worried the white wouldn't look good on top of the red, but it's turned out all right. It's opaque enough. It didn't turn pink. The decals are a little bit fuzzy. If you look very closely, there's a little bit of blur around the white, but it's not bad. Just for fun, I cut away the inside of my grill face and replaced it with some photo etch. I had to cut away some chunks of the grill face to get them to clear the hinges. Perhaps AMT intended that I glue the hinges to the grill face. One could try it that way, I suppose. So I've test fit the tires onto the wheels, and these are the kit tires. And once you get them on these rear wheels, there's a big enough space between the tires that you can kind of see that it's two tires stuffed onto a cylinder, which isn't quite right. I mean, it should look like two tires mounted on wheels that are bolted back to back. So I was looking online, and I found an aftermarket company called Moluminum. I'll put a link for that down below. And they have some very nice tires. They're just a little bit wider than the kit tires. So when you get them on there, that inner cylinder for the wheels is in deep enough shadow that you can't really see it anymore. And it looks a lot better. And the tires themselves are pretty nice too. The Moluminum website also has some resin aftermarket parts, and I got some resin tread plate to span the gap in the frame there. When getting the engine in, I discovered that this drive shaft was too short. So I cut the U-joints off and I glued them onto two different diameters of plastic tubing so that they can kind of telescope together as I'm putting things together. Well, that's it for now from Paul's Messy Bench Models. You should all stop playing with your computers and go build something now. Take care. Talk to you later. Bye.